It is astounding to me that somebody like Mike Pence or so many other people who lied to the public continuously, led our country into disastrous wars, one after the next, are now just speaking as though none of it ever happened. It would be like as if a journalist...
Welcome back, everyone. Good to have you here. All right, so what we are looking at today is one of those panel discussions that genuinely gets uncomfortable in the best possible way. Glenn Greenwald and Anna Kasparian are sitting across from a retired U.S. general and a former IDF spokesman on Piers Morgan Uncensored, and the topic is the U.S. and Israel's military operation against Iran. What starts as a political debate turns into something much more raw when a direct question about American soldiers gets met with total silence from the one person in the room who should have an answer. Stay with this one all the way through, because the moment near the end where a pro-war general openly agrees with the anti-war argument on live television is not something you want to miss. Before we get into it, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from. I genuinely love seeing where this community comes from, and it always surprises me. All right, let us get into it.
Piers, you and I have been around a long time. We went through Iraq together. The fact is, I think that Starmer just did not want to be referred, as Tony was, as the British poodle. So I think what he wanted to do is give it a little bit of time, make it look like this is an independent decision of his, rather than being... We do have a special relationship, but we're not tied at the hips, and Britain is not a proxy for the United States. We knew, particularly if the Iranians started firing back, that Britain would come in the way that the Saudis and the Emiratis have come in. And one last comment. Anna, please quit using the tropes on American soldiers. I've had to bury 7 American soldiers. They went into the battlefield.
How is it a trope? How is it a trope? How is it a trope to see American soldiers die on behalf of Israel's wars? How is that a trope? Explain that to me.
Nobody's dying on behalf of Israel.
I'm not going to dignify that. Let me
read you. Let me read you what Israeli media has been saying. So American soldiers came under friendly fire in Kuwait. I don't know if any of them have died. Hopefully none of them have died. But on Channel 12, Niv Raskin said this: "We need to emphasize this is an incident involving American forces and not, heaven forbid, an incident involving Israeli forces."
And why is he representative of anything, Anna? Who makes him representative of anything? Why are you
This is a huge figure in Israeli media.
No,
saying
he's not
this
a
out
huge
loud.
figure. He's a talking head on
Sacrificing
a
American
morning
soldiers
show.
is totally okay, I guess.
Well, okay. Look, I want to bring in. I
would like him to answer my question. Why is that considered a trope?
Okay.
Why is it considered a trope to be concerned about American soldiers during these endless, nonsensical wars? Why is that considered a trope?
How many times have you gone to Arlington and paid your respect to American heroes?
I'm not talking to you, Conricus, you terrorist piece of crap. I'm talking to the general.
Okay,
tell me why that's
please keep the ad hominem down.
I want to of fallen American soldiers.
Can we go back to the
answer the question?
Can I bring some order to this, please? Jonathan, let me conduct the panel, please, because Glenn's been waiting very patiently. Before I come to you, Glenn, and I will give you plenty of time to speak, I can promise you that. General, just explain why you consider that to be a trope. And secondly, I was really struck by this friendly fire incident, because I can't remember, I'm sure you will be able to correct me here, but has it ever happened before that 3 American fighter jets have all been downed in a friendly fire incident, apparently here by Kuwaiti forces by mistake, as they went over Kuwaiti airspace? Can you remember 3 American fighter jets going down in friendly fire in one incident?
No. And I'm sure those Kuwaiti soldiers that fired those shots will remember that for the rest of their lives. Luckily, none of the airmen were killed. They got out of their aircraft alive and relatively unhurt. We call it the fog of war.
Yeah, and in relation to the
why is it a trope?
Fact you think it's a... Yeah, I think, be fair to Anna Kasparian, just answer her question, why you view that as a trope, what she said.
I'm not going to dignify it with a response.
You just want to smear me with nonsensical claims, but you can't even answer why you even believe in the smear. What is the trope? You can't answer it, right?
I'll tell you
being
why,
concerned about Americans dying on behalf of
I want to come to Glenn.
is apparently a trope.
Okay,
Everything that offends Israel is a trope.
Total hypocrite.
Right.
That's
okay,
what you
the
are.
general.
You're a total
Listen,
hypocrite.
the general's chosen not to respond. That's his right. I want to go to Glenn.
This is the moment where you see exactly how these conversations get controlled. Anna asked one of the most straightforward questions you can ask in a political debate. She wanted to know why caring about American soldiers dying in foreign wars is considered a trope. That is it. Simple. Direct. And what did the general do? He said he was not going to dignify it with a response. You have to understand what just happened there. A military man who said he buried 7 American soldiers just refused to explain why someone caring about those deaths is somehow offensive. Let that land for a second. The whole point Anna was making is that these soldiers deserve better than being used as a justification for the next conflict, and his answer to that was silence. Here is what blows my mind. The general framed concern for American soldiers as a trope, as if it is some recycled, tired talking point people pull out just to be difficult. But Anna kept pressing. She did not back down. She asked again, and the general sat there and said nothing because there is nothing you can say. You cannot justify that position out loud without exposing exactly what it reveals about your priorities. And here is the part people miss. There is a long pattern in American political debate where raising the human cost of military action gets dismissed as weak thinking or even as disloyalty. But the soldiers who go into those situations are real people. The families waiting for them at home are real. That is not a trope. That is the point, and the fact that a decorated military man could not answer a simple question about it tells you more than any speech ever could.
Glenn, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you. Look, this is a story. A lot of passions are going to run very high here. I don't have all the answers to what I think is going to happen here. It does, to me, bring back a lot of bad memories from the Iraq War, which was started in many people's eyes who perpetrated it for the best of intentions. Saddam was a bad guy, doing bad things to his people, killing many of them, running a ruthless regime, possessing weapons of mass destruction, and he had to be stopped. I've been on this rodeo of rhetoric before, and it feels to me like we're on a very similar path now, but Iran is an altogether bigger and more difficult scenario than even Iraq was. You've got 220,000 Revolutionary Guard. You have nearly 1 million regular army. You have many other paramilitaries, hundreds of thousands more. This idea that America has, or Donald Trump has, that by doing these strikes, you're going to start a big revolution amongst the people on the ground. They've got to get past 1.5 million very heavily armed people that will try and stop them. And we saw recently they stopped 30,000 of them by killing them. So do you think that the mission here is even achievable? And do you think what has happened is legal?
I am glad, Piers, that we started the segment with Mike Pence because he is an American elected official who voted for the Iraq War in 2002, 2003, continued to defend it for many years. And unlike many American politicians who did that, who ended up saying they regretted it or it was a mistake, Mike Pence, to this very day, believes that going into Iraq was the right thing to do. And everything that he said in justification and defense of this new war was exactly the things that he and all the other American leaders who wanted this war in 2002 and 2003 were saying then. But it's not just the Iraq war. It's also exactly what happened in Libya. President Obama said, oh, don't worry, this isn't a regime change war. It's just to protect the people of Benghazi, and that it ended up being a regime change war that destroyed Libya. It's what we did in Afghanistan, where we were told, oh, we're just going in to get Osama bin Laden. And then 20 years later, our troops leave, trillions of dollars spent, huge numbers of dead, and the Taliban march right back into power. And you can even go back to Vietnam, where we were lied into that war, lied through that war by many of the same people who telling us now that we have to do this. It is astounding to me that somebody like Mike Pence or so many other people who lied to the public continuously, led our country into disastrous wars, one after the next, are now just speaking as though none of it ever happened. It would be like as if a journalist, I published 8 or 9 different fraudulent stories with fake quotes and fake sources, and then the next day I woke up and said, oh, I know I did those things in the past, but I think I should still have credibility for you to listen to my reporting today, even though I did all of that. The other point I want to make is, I want to ask Jonathan, because honestly, it is very, very difficult, I have to confess, not just for me, but for the world, as the polls show, to listen to an Israeli official in an Israeli accent, give lectures on the need to have compassion for civilians after everything we just watched Israel do, vaporizing tens of thousands of people in Gaza, all throughout the Middle East, attacking countries. But since he is here, I do want to ask him, Jonathan, there's a lot of reports in mainstream Western press about how the IDF has built its primary military and intelligence structures, not just within key residential areas in Tel Aviv, but also underneath. Is it true that the IDF has built key military and intelligence targets within residential areas of Tel Aviv and beneath residential targets in Tel Aviv, the way that the Western media has continuously reported? Is that actually true?
This is the part that stops you cold. Glenn came in calm, measured, and then completely dismantled the entire premise of why we should trust the people selling this war. He pointed out that Mike Pence voted for the war in the early 2000s, defended it for years, and unlike many politicians who eventually admitted it was a mistake, Mike still believes to this day it was the right call, and now Mike is using the exact same language, the exact same justifications to push for this one. Glenn said it perfectly. He compared it to a journalist who published multiple fraudulent stories with fake sources, and then the very next day asks you to trust their reporting as if nothing happened. That analogy hit because it is exactly right. There is a credibility problem here that nobody on the pro-war side wants to address directly. And then Glenn pivoted to something genuinely underreported. He pointed out that it is very difficult for the world to sit and listen to lectures about compassion for civilians from people connected to a military that the world watched level entire neighborhoods full of non-combatants. That is not a talking point. That is a documented reality that exists in mainstream Western reporting. The contrast between what is being said in a studio and what has actually happened on the ground creates a credibility gap that no debate can close. You have to understand that when credibility collapses in international affairs, everything gets harder. Every moral argument, every call for global support, every justification offered to allies. Glenn was not just making an emotional point here. He was describing a structural problem that follows Western foreign policy everywhere it goes. And then he asked Jonathan a very specific question that I guarantee you did not expect Jonathan to answer the way he did.
Yeah, I can give a relatively short and plain answer to it. Surprising question. I've read some of your reporting and you seem like an informed guy. Yes, the IDF headquarters, referred to as the Kiryat, is indeed located in Tel Aviv. It is surrounded by civilian buildings, and inside the headquarters, not underneath civilians, but underneath the headquarters itself, is a bunker, which is not a revolutionary concept of militaries. And that bunker is a few stories below ground. Its name is indeed the Zion Citadel, and that is where some of the Israeli officers, generals conduct military operations from. I suppose some of the strikes, if not all of the strikes that are ongoing in Iran today, are managed from there. When Iran targeted that location, they've targeted it now. They have targeted it in the past, and Hezbollah has targeted it in the past, and so have many others. You actually never heard anybody in Israel, definitely not anybody official, say that isn't okay, and it's not a military target. It is a military target. We cannot move Tel Aviv out of the way, and the base is probably too big to move out of the way. And if it is hit, then it is on Israel, because it is a military target. But there is a very big difference here between doing that, having a properly marked and disclosed location, which is the IDF base. Everybody knows that it's there. And doing what our enemies do, which is hide underneath and between the civilian population, disguised as civilians and using civilians as human shields. There are no civilians above the base used as human shields. And there are no civilians that are told to be in a certain location so that our enemies won't strike.
Okay.
Because that's a cowardly thing to do. Yeah.
Pierre,
okay. You've asked the question.
Can I just make one quick point? Can I just make one quick point about the moral aspect that we raised? You said none of us should be mourning a vicious dictator. And the one thing, the two quick things I will say about that is, we were told that about Saddam Hussein. We were told that about Muammar Gaddafi. certainly in Libya, we were told, oh, Muammar Gaddafi said that's certainly a good thing. What came after in Libya was some of the worst, most nightmarish dystopia that the world has seen in the past 50 years, certainly far worse than what it had under Gaddafi. And I think a lot of this depends on what succeeds in Iran. Is it going to be this incredibly destroyed state, balkanized with anarchy, where ISIS and Al-Qaeda can fill the power vacuum as they did with the invasion of Iraq? Is it going to be an even worse tyrant like the Shah of Iran was, or some other worse militias and factions? And then the other point is, it's a little bit hard to hear the United States and Great Britain and other countries say, oh, we're doing this for the moral reason that we want to cleanse Iran of tyranny, when our closest allies and partners in that region that we prop up and give military technology and spying technology are at least as savage and brutal dictatorships as Iran is. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Emiratis, going throughout the rest of the world to Uganda, Rwanda. We love dictatorships. We prop up tyrannies all the time. I think it's very hard to make a moral case, especially as you're bombing civilian places all throughout Iran, that we somehow are doing this because we want to bring freedom and democracy to the Iraqi people, the Iranian people. The last time we did change the government in Iran, we imposed a horrific dictator on them for 20, 30 years called the Shah of Iran. And now we want to do it with his son. So these moral questions are much more complex than, is the Ayatollah a good or a bad guy?
Okay, Goldie Gamara, you were rolling your eyes there.
We should have no moral reasons at all. Again, there was no morality in our negotiations last Thursday for no nukes, no missiles, and no proxies. And I don't think if we start getting into the moral regime change, everything you're describing, Glenn, if we're trying to get into another Iraq, that's the mission creep we don't want to see. We are now using the military force to achieve the end state that our negotiations weren't able to do. And candidly, I also agree with you that we shouldn't completely wipe out the leadership of the country.
And then something remarkable happened. Glenn asked Jonathan directly whether the IDF had built its military headquarters inside a civilian area of Tel Aviv, and Jonathan confirmed it. On camera, he said, yes, the headquarters is there. It is surrounded by civilian buildings, and there is a bunker underneath it called the Zion Citadel. He even acknowledged that strikes on Iran right now are likely being managed from inside that location. Now think carefully about why that matters. The entire framework being used to justify military operations in dense civilian areas abroad rests on the argument that military targets embedded in civilian zones are the moral failure of the defending side. But Jonathan just confirmed that the IDF itself operates from inside a major civilian city, and his reasoning was that because it is a disclosed, marked location, it is a legitimate military target, which is exactly the same argument the other side makes about their own facilities. The logic cuts both ways. You cannot use it selectively. This is precisely what Glenn was building toward with his moral hypocrisy argument at the end of this segment. He pointed out that it is very hard to hear Western governments claim they are fighting for freedom and against tyranny when the governments they arm, fund, and protect year after year include some of the most authoritarian systems on the planet. He named them specifically: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Gulf states. These are not imperfect democracies trying to improve. These are governments with extensively documented records of suppressing dissent, restricting basic freedoms, and operating without accountability. Here is the historical context that actually matters. The last time outside powers directly intervened to change the Iranian government, the result was a leader imposed on the population who ruled without accountability for decades. What followed was one of the most significant popular uprisings of the 20th century, and produced a government arguably more hostile to Western interests than what came before. That is not opinion. That is documented history, and it is directly relevant to what is being debated in this clip. So when Glenn says the moral case falls apart under scrutiny, he is not being cynical for the sake of it. He is being precise. And then the general, a pro-war voice on that same panel, agreed there was no moral framework for this operation from the beginning. That is not a small admission made quietly. That is a decorated military figure validating the progressive argument live on air. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a debate is not the loudest one. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.